everyone. My name is Dom Hebblethwaite, and I'm Head of Membership at the Chartered Institute of Linguists, CIOL. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our webinar, More Than Fluency, the Value of Languages for Corporate Careers, which is part of our commitment to supporting linguists interested in business, professions, and government, BPG. Today, we're going to look at things from a different angle. Rather than focusing on roles where you use your languages every day, we want to explore the wider value that learning a language brings to a career in business. The qualities you build as a linguist, things like clear communication, cultural awareness, adaptability, attention to detail, and the confidence to work across borders are exactly the qualities employers are looking for. So whether or not you use your languages in your job, the skills behind them can take you a long way. We'll hear from three professionals who studied languages and have gone on to build successful careers in banking, professional services, and innovation. Nigel Moden and Sophie Leng from EY and Lauren Quigley from Barclays. Each of them can speak to how their language background has shaped the way they work. So just to update everyone on the format for today's session, our panelists will introduce themselves. I'll say a quick word about CIOL. We'll run a few polls to get to know you, and then I'll put a series of questions to Nigel, Sophie, and Lauren about their experiences and their advice for linguists building careers in the corporate world. Just a little bit of housekeeping as well. In order to manage the webinar effectively, everyone's camera and microphone has been switched off. There will be a time for Q&A at the end, and all the questions will be managed via the questions panel on GoToWebinar. So please do go ahead and post your questions as we go along, and we'll cover as many as we can. Okay, so without further ado, let's meet our panelists. And Nigel, let's start with you. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your role?
Thanks, Dom, and hello, everyone. Great to be part of this. So my name's Nigel Moden. I spent my career in financial services, in banking, started off as a graduate entrant in Barclays, spent about 10 years there, and then I spent the rest of my career in professional services, in consulting, working with the financial services sector. And my current role is that I lead our business at EY as a partner, and I look after our business that looks after the banking sector globally, so lots of international cross-border work, which I'm sure we'll talk about as we go through this.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Nigel. And Sophie, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role?
Thanks, Dom. So I started off my career as a Latin American analyst at a corporate intelligence firm. I spent most of my career working across financial services, professional services, and banking. And I'm currently working in EY's financial services firm with a heavy focus on financial crime, corporate regulation, and regulatory risk. I'm happy to be here today with everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sophie. And finally, Lauren, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks, Dom. And hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here. So my name's Lauren Quigley, and I currently head up the partnerships team within Group Innovation at Barclays. My career has spanned a whole number of different roles, industries, and I guess kind of sector focuses. So really excited to kind of talk a little bit about some of that today. I guess the kind of golden thread throughout everything has been innovation. So really excited to talk about kind of where languages can kind of align very much with kind of innovation and how those skills very much complement one another. So delighted to be here.
Fantastic, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you very much. And then just to say just a very little bit about us at CIOL. So we are the chartered body for languages, the UK Professional Languages Lead. For those who don't know chartered bodies, there are chartered bodies for just about every profession in the UK, whether that may be accountants, architects, IT workers, and of course we're the professional body for linguists. Like all professional bodies or royal chartered bodies, we have our own set of aims, objectives, or objects, and as you can see, this webinar absolutely fits within those aims as a chartered body. Now, I do know we have a number of students attending today, so it's great to have you here. And just to let you know, that we do have free student membership for all students studying a relevant degree. So that could be a language degree, a joint honours degree with the languages, translation or interpreting, anything relevant there. And there's a very simple and straightforward means for becoming a member, and so would encourage you to do that. And we'll also share within the chat a link so you can sign up to be a free student member. We have then a range of professional grades. Once again, as a free student member, once you've graduated, you can go straight to associate member, our first professional grade, with a fast track application and a discount. And then if you're using your languages in your work, you can grow and develop to become a full member, and then after further years of experience, also a chartered linguist. So we'll once again share links so you can find your grade there. Okay, so that's a little bit about us. Now we'd like to know more about you. So we're just going to run a few very quick polls, and I'm going to launch the first one now. So what best describes your situation? And do fill this in. These polls are anonymous. They're just to help us, Nigel, Lauren, and Sophie, tailor our answers for you and to get an understanding of who we have on this webinar today. By the way, we had over 550 registrations, and we have 232 people already live on this call right now. So as I'll hold it open just a second longer, and there. So we have 45% students, 19% just graduated, 14% freelancers looking to move into the corporate sector, 4% already working within a corporate role, and 18% in the other category. And we can only have 5 options here, so we always miss you out. So do feel free to put in the chat what other you are. So thank you for that. That's very, very helpful. Okay, so other than English, what is your additional language? And apologies, we can't list every language here. We've had to choose categorized as in 5. So please put your votes in there, and you can, I believe, also add more than 1 category here if that applies to you. So we'll keep this open. We have already over 60% of people have voted, and we'll hold it open just another, let's say, 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we have 79% with Romance languages, French, Italian, Portuguese, people of my heart, my languages there. We have 20% with Germanic languages. We have 13% with Slavic or other European languages, 4% Middle Eastern or African, and 20% with Asian languages such as Chinese, Japanese, Hindi, or Korean. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And we have just one more poll question to go, which is, what is your main reason for attending today? You can only pick one here, so just the one that most applies to you. And we'll keep these open as the votes come in. We've already had 40% voting. We'll keep it open another, let's say, 3 seconds from now. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So 54% curious what careers my languages could lead to. 17% looking to start or move into a corporate career. 4% already in a corporate role, wanting to hear from others. 21% looking for tips on positioning their language skills, and 5% in the other category. Once again, feel free to add that in the chat. Thank you very much. Okay, well, I think that was very interesting and very, very helpful. And that allows us to now move straight into our set questions. And I will start with Sophie. Could I ask you, where did your love of languages come from?
Thanks, Dom. And really interesting to see the poll results. I know just looking that we have a lot of students on, and I think something like this would have definitely been helpful for me when I was a new graduate. For me, my interest in languages is really twofold. It's both an academic and a really kind of personal interest for me. My dad's side of the family is from Chile, but I really unfortunately wasn't raised bilingual. I didn't grow up speaking Spanish. And so that kind of created like a gap for me that I became more and more aware of as I got older. So when I came to learning languages in school, I obviously chose to learn Spanish, and I kind of viewed it as a way to almost connect with that side of my family, my dad's side of my family, and kind of viewed it as a way to almost reconnect, or to connect in the very first instance with half my family who I chose to be able to communicate with and to understand them in their native language. The other kind of personal element for me was I actually grew up in the US. I grew up in a part of the US that has been shaped by a lot of migration from Mexico, from Central America. So the Spanish language, or rather Latin American culture, was really heavily embedded in the neighborhood and the city that I grew up in. So again, although I didn't grow up speaking Spanish as a native, as a bilingual, it was always really part of my environment. So that kind of really pushed me to learn the language, both from kind of my family and the wider like context that I was in. So I studied Spanish at school, and then I studied at university. During my university degree, I had a year abroad, which I spent half in Spain and half in Peru. And I think during my time on my year abroad, I then came to realize that language is more than just that kind of academic pursuit, more than just kind of translating and grammatical exercises, which shape so much of what we would have done as students. But for me, it was also about gaining that access to different ways of thinking, different maybe social customs, understanding a country's history, their politics, their people really firsthand. So it became more about a way to connect both kind of outward, but also for me inward to like my own family and my own family history.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you so much for that. And Lauren, what about you? How what started your love of languages and your amazing list of languages that you speak?
Well, I mean, some are a little rusty today than they could be. So yeah, I mean, to that point, great to see lots of Romance languages kind of in the audience, but also Slav languages. So I studied French, Spanish, Russian, and Serbian at university. But I think from a really young age, well, I was very lucky. My family are kind of from all over the world. We're a bit of a blend. So I think inherently that just already opens your eyes a little bit, what Sophie was saying, to kind of different cultures, different people, different experiences. You know, we were very fortunate enough to travel a fair amount as a young family. And that really gave me a lot of exposure, particularly to kind of, parts of Europe and France and areas like that just, really just opened my eyes. And it was a real just part of my early childhood, being exposed to different cultures and different people. But I think really my as I've grown and kind of matured and gone through more kind of formalized academia and things like that, I think my just inherent love of just people. I'm fascinated by people from different places, different cultures, different experiences. I'm really interested in kind of geopolitics, and kind of as a result actually started out in kind of journalism and working kind of at the New York Times, because I'm just fascinated by kind of what the world is all about. And I think, languages and kind of learning what all the wraparound that kind of Sophie also mentioned there, the language and kind of the practice is one thing, but it's what it unlocks as a whole, and kind of being able to connect with people on a very different level, to say through English or someone else's second language is just something that's always been very exciting to me. I'm also personally just very interested in traveling, and I think the best experiences I've ever had are when I've been able to immerse myself fully in those places. So I think, I think when I was growing up, particularly kind of the route of academia or kind of just education that I took was very kind of science and mathematical, and I also wanted to go against the grain a little bit and challenge some of that. I think my kind of secondary school, I think nearly every girl studied maths A level, but only 12 of us did Spanish, and I think it was just a really exciting kind of new space relatively for kind of that school, and I'm someone that tends to want to go slightly alternatively. And yeah, and that's kind of where I've ended up today. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but yeah, it's a real part of me.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And Nigel, tell us about what started your love for languages.
Well, I had no real sort of family background in languages, and I grew up in Lincolnshire, and there wasn't much Romance language inspiration to be had there. But I have an amazing teacher to sort of thank, really, for unlocking that sort of passion. And a bit like Lauren was saying, I was part of a guinea pig group, actually sort of learning Spanish for the first time in my school. So there were only 3 of us who made that journey. And like all the best teachers, I mean, the teacher just conveyed his passion for not only the language, but for the overall Spanish culture, the history, the music. We would do theatre trips, the literature. And so, that really kind of, rubbed off on us and sort of gave us, gave me that sort of momentum. And there was a phrase he used, which I've since borrowed, and I think it really perfectly sums up what learning a language is all about. And he kind of said, if you know a language, it turns you from a snorkeler into a scuba diver. And as a snorkeler, you can sort of look down, and if the water's clear, you can kind of make out some pretty things, but you're remote and no one interacts with you. As a scuba diver, you're in there, you're actually experiencing it. The colors are so much richer. You actually understand how that part of the world works. And I've certainly found that on all my kind of subsequent interactions. And I think it's a great sort of analogy. And so, from his inspiration, I then went into, it was a no-brainer for me to study languages, like Lauren and Sophie at uni. I did French and Spanish. My year abroad was in Latin America, and that really then sparked a particular interest in all things Latin American. And then after I graduated, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and so I kicked the can down the road and did a master's degree in Latin American studies, which embraced everything from Aztec mythology to some more real world sort of Latin American politics, economics. And I suppose it was then at that point when I kind of thought about the combinations and the language plus the, economics, international relations, that started to shape, I guess, how I thought about my career choices. And so yeah, but it all stemmed from a fantastic teacher.
Brilliant, brilliant. And we've actually just had a comment in from a teacher saying how wonderful it is to hear how teachers can start a journey for someone. So that's lovely to hear. Okay, so our next question, and we'll reverse the order here. We'll come back to you first now, Nigel. How has learning a language and the skills you've developed along the way, how has that impacted your very successful career?
Well, I think there are a lot of a lot of softer skills that come with languages that I know Sophie will kind of talk about and really bring to life. But I guess in terms of the actually speaking French and Spanish, I would genuinely say that I don't think I would be a partner at EY without my Spanish skills in particular. And I think it's because at various different points in my career, there's been an opportunity to differentiate, and language skills have been the differentiator. And if you think about, the kind of companies that we work for, they're massive companies. I mean, we have nearly 500,000 people across the world. Barclays has 100,000, etc. All of the big companies, and so and you almost take technical competence as a given. There are lots of smart people, and there have been various opportunities that I've had along the way, which I've got because I've had the language skills. And so, there was a big piece in Mexico that I did many years ago where there would have been lots of people qualified to do the job technically, but I was the only one who actually had the sort of fluent Spanish. Likewise, I did a piece in French-speaking Africa, which again is, was because of my language that I got that opportunity. And what you find is that because of those, that language skills then makes you more visible in a big company. It's about sort of, building that network, building that brand, stepping into, fairly kind of interesting new challenges and being able to sort of actually interact locally and be effective. And the big turning point for me in my career, I think, was the opportunity I had to relocate to Madrid, which was about 15 years ago, when we were bringing all of our European businesses together, and so we needed someone who spoke the language, alongside having the technical skills for this particular team. And again, it was a long list of people who technically could do it, but actually I think a list of one, if I'm honest, who had then the Spanish as well. And so I then was able to step into that role. And again, that created a profile visibility. And it was on the back of that sort of 3-year secondment to Madrid that I became a partner at EY, because that was my differentiation. And so I think it's, yeah, I mean, I think that's the short version, Dom, but I think languages have been a key part of my differentiation and the way I've been able to grasp opportunities and sort of sell myself internally as well as externally.
Fantastic, that's great to hear. Okay, great. So we'll now turn to you, Lauren. I know you're not using your languages in your current role, but how would you like to sort of expand on this question?
Yeah, I think I'd almost take a slightly different perspective to Nigel, because I mean, to your point, today I don't use my languages in my role, but I've had roles on and off throughout my career where I have. I think that there's something about kind of graduating, say, with a languages degree or being a linguist that is both a bit daunting, but can also be considered quite freeing. So it's not, you know, a degree or kind of a path that you go down that necessarily determines one or two kind of immediately obvious choices. And I think for many people, that can feel like a very scary kind of market to be facing when you're coming out of university. Like, technically I could do anything, but does that also mean I can't do anything? And it's a really interesting kind of friction and tension I know that I experienced. But for me, I think really what it unlocks, so inherently I think people that are interested in learning languages and about other cultures inherently are very curious people, very open, want to try new things, open to experiences, and as a result you end up kind of just going for it. And that has actually kind of having that momentum in my career has really allowed me to build almost a very complicated patchwork portfolio of very different types of experiences, from working abroad in Spain and France to starting out in commodity trading with a French kind of Algerian organization and traveling to there and doing all sorts of really wacky things, through to then kind of moving into the charity sector and into corporate, into consultancy. And I think this kind of willingness to almost like enter into the unknown, to be uncomfortable, because I think, you know, these are sort of experiences and skills that you really build up, but when you learn languages, it's quite rare. Relatively, you know, many people just want kind of a determined path that they can follow. So kind of having the courage to sort of shape your own path and not be afraid for it to veer off in one direction or another, I think is something that inherently comes kind of hand in hand with being open to learning new languages and learning about new cultures. So I think that that's a real benefit. So I think whilst obviously kind of Nigel's experience, there's been some amazing opportunities within EY to kind of progress and really like leverage the fact that he has these incredible skills. Actually, I've found that I've had to drive a lot of that opportunity, and there haven't necessarily been obvious positions, say in Barclays, for me to step in because I'm a French speaker or anything necessarily like that. But it's more everything that comes around it and everything that wraps around it and makes me a kind of enriched person that has sort of allowed me, particularly now, you know, I've spent the last 8-9 years in innovation, which essentially is that, you know, the practice of creating new things out of nothing and predicting the future and sense making and all of these good things. And yeah, for me, they are inherently one and the same type of skill set. So I think it's having the confidence to think beyond say the obvious. And yes, if you want to use your languages day to day, that is, you know, you're going to have to go down a certain path. But if, you know, you're thinking more around what kind of transferable skills come from learning languages and how can they unlock different career paths for me, I think being able to build that kind of patchwork of you as a career, especially starting out in your journey, where, you know, experience is really, you know, the most valuable thing, and it takes time to build that. So if you can bring really diverse experience and kind of perspectives to an employer, that is hugely valuable.
Fascinating, thank you. Okay, And Sophie, how about you? How would you like to answer this?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. I think I definitely kind of would echo what Lauren was saying. When I look back on my career, it feels like I've had a very squiggly career. It has not been linear at all. I suppose my early career was more heavily focused on using languages. Like I said, my first job straight out of university was as a Latin America analyst for a corporate intelligence firm. So in that job, I was really able to draw on my Spanish skills, reviewing Spanish media, company records, public sources, etc., to kind of help understand that commercial market risk for the firm I worked at. So I would say, although Spanish was my kind of entry point into the corporate world and into my first job, the broader skill set of languages and what comes along with language learning is, I would say, is what has helped me progress and advance in my career to date. And it's things that we've kind of touched on and alluded to, the ability to write clearly, to communicate clearly, to be able to simply and persuasively explain your point of view and your argument to the senior stakeholders in a room, to the decision makers, to communicate what you want to get across. I think also we as linguists and language learners, we are better equipped to deal with nuance and to understand nuance in whether it be, a text, an email, a report, what have you. And that ability to kind of read between the lines and really understand context has been really important in my career. And then whether that's translating it into, like I said, a report for a client or a PowerPoint, what have you, you might not think that, when you're translating from source text to another or source language to another language, that would ever help in the corporate world. But that ability is actually it's really important, and it has served me well.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you for those very interesting answers. And we'll move here to, and some of it we've touched on, but beyond fluency itself, the act of learning languages, what has it taught you that carries over into your work? And let's start with Lauren, if I may this time.
Yeah, happy to. So yeah, I think I touched a little bit on kind of the inherent curiosity that I think drives very interesting employers and employees rather. I think also being comfortable with ambiguity. I think in today's kind of corporate world, there is a huge amount of change that is just a standard part of day-to-day life, particularly in the area that I work, but actually across the entire, say, Barclays, we are being absolutely transformed by massive advancements in AI and other frontier technologies, and how that's entirely shifting business models and everything that we're doing. So this kind of willingness to be, or kind of the comfort in ambiguity, willingness to adopt and try new things, I think is absolutely going to be a crucial skill for the next 10, 15 years within corporate kind of life. And for me, I take and have always taken quite, a mathematical approach to learning languages. My background being also fairly mathematical, and I've found that has made my kind of ease and comfort around technology fairly free coming, kind of easy coming, which has been great in terms of kind of the way that, as I say, organizations today are completely transforming end to end. So I think there's a huge amount of parallels to be drawn there in terms of kind of technological advancements in the way that we learn and kind of learn about new languages and kind of explore the frontier of kind of cultures and things like that. So I think that's certainly important. I think there's an element around things like, Sophie touched on their communication skills, but more than anything, I think it's being able to confidently kind of articulate in a room. So spoken communication, I think, is actually so important. I think there are tools out there now that we can all be using to help with our written communication and tightening, the way that we're writing prose and things like that, and positioning for executive kind of narratives. But spoken communication is, that's inherently going to be down to the individual. And I think that is something that, from studying languages, all those many oral exams and oral seminars and things like that, where you're, being forced to Sophie's point, articulate complex concepts or your position and your point of view on something in different languages, I think just builds this layer of resilience and confidence around kind of public speaking, around speaking in kind of open forums, which again, I think is going to be fundamental. And I definitely recognize, you know, when I see kind of junior colleagues progressing from, say, AVP to VPs and things like that, what tends to set them apart is how they hold themselves in senior stakeholder rooms, how they kind of articulate themselves in person as well as in written. But that is what kind of leaves a mark when you're, you know, a senior decision maker thinking about progression and promotion for individuals. So I think that's very, very important. So yeah, I mean, I'll pause there because I think there's probably so much more I can say.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So there's some really interesting points about the importance, of course, of spoken communication, and also that confidence in ambiguity in a kind of AI-affected world that we're living in, and no doubt we'll be living in for you know, plenty of time to come. As Sophie, how about you? Would you like to sort of add to that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I mean, we've touched on the kind of adaptability side. I think that's definitely something that has come through in my career, certainly. Like I mentioned, my career has not been linear. I've moved, I've changed sectors, I've changed industries, and having that kind of confidence to step into a new role, a new firm, a new company, I think has been really crucial. I think that one of the skills that languages, I feel, has given me is that ability to be able to read situations, to understand context, and then like Lauren was kind of alluding to, adjust your communication style depending on the context and the situation that you're in. And as Lauren was saying, that only becomes more and more important as you kind of progress in your career. And that's something that we use all the time in the kind of corporate space. I would say another thing, and again, I know we touched on it, is that real ability to have both written and orally, just linguistic precision. It's incredibly important, I think, particularly in the work that I do. I engage a lot with financial regulators. I also have done some government work around kind of policy issues, and you come to realize just how much precision matters. You realize, you know, a word, changing word here or there, how that changes, and how, for example, when you're engaging with the regulator, how they might challenge just one word here or there. So I suppose the ability to analyze language really closely, think actually critically, what does the sentence mean? Are we conveying this in the best way for our clients? And choosing words really deliberately is so crucial to the work that, certainly the work that I've done in my time here at EY.
Fantastic. So some more very interesting points. Nigel, would you like to add anything to this question?
I think Lauren and Sophie have done a very good job there in terms of yeah. The one thing I would add is in terms of building teams and getting collaboration and getting everyone sort of, you know, heading in the right direction. I think those, you know, we sometimes maybe underestimate just what our language background gives us in terms of an ability to build that empathy, to reach out to people, and to, as I say, sometimes persuade teams who initially don't want to do a particular thing, to actually persuade them along the journey and sort of, you know, sell that overall narrative, particularly when you're doing it cross-border. I think having that sort of almost that linguistic mindset and a start point of empathy, I think is really valuable when you're doing those kind of activities.
Fantastic. Yes, and a very important point. And okay, we'll move on to the next question, and we'll come back to you for this one in particular, Nigel. Actually, I mean, you've just obviously talked about building teams and the help for that. Obviously, you have a very senior role at EY and work very closely with HR in terms of recruiting talent. So I know you've had various conversations about this. What's, you know, how are language skills valued by HR departments these days, and are there any sort of noticeable trends you've seen?
Yeah, and I've talked to a few clients about this as well in preparation for this to get a sense, so it's not just an EY perspective. But I think what comes across is is quite a different trend emerging, I think, in terms of the skills that recruiters are prioritizing. I mean, you know, I would say over the last 10, 15 years, we probably saw quite a lot of focus on, let's say, kind of rational, cold logic skills. And so you'd see quite a lot of sort of maths, engineering, sciences, business coming through in the kind of business world, because there was a perception that actually it is all about, cold hard data and facts and logic, and sort of, creativity is almost kind of, secondary. I think the world has changed dramatically. And I think, talking to recruiters now, and especially if you think about two things really. One is the macro environment and that sort of, the volatility, the uncertainty that Lauren was talking about. I mean, I think there are new dynamics emerging now. I don't think we can take the old world order for granted anymore. And I think there are new trade relationships building every day. There's the South to South dynamic, the Middle East to China, China to the rest of Asia. So I think all of those trends require new businesses to be built, new relationships to be developed, and languages are sort of key there. I think the other big trend is obviously AI. And when you look at then some of the skills that perhaps were prioritized in the past, I think there's an emerging view now that actually AI can actually very successfully take some of that cold hard logic and do quite a lot of that, fact data aggregation piece. And so what are you left with in terms of human skills? You're left with the importance of many of the things that Lauren and Sophie were talking about. Recruiters talk about the need for judgment, the need for intercultural awareness, the need for that sort of communication skills. A lot of the sort of the softer skills we talk about. I love that word, that phrase around reading between the lines. Just being in a room and sort of being sensitive to what's not said as well as what is said, and interpreting the real meaning behind those things. And so I think a lot of recruitment processes have been adjusted now to really kind of draw out what our sort of innate abilities around some of those softer, what I would call sort of leadership skills in the making. And so I think that as even where there's not an explicit requirement to speak a particular language, I think some of those selection processes now, I think languages students and people with language backgrounds have a very natural, if you like, advantage in terms of responding to some of those processes. The final thing I would say is that a lot of recruitment interviews focus very much on situational analysis, and so you'll find questions like tell me about a situation where you've resolved conflict. Tell me about a situation where you didn't get what you wanted to start with. How did you go about influencing? And those questions are just perfect perfect opportunities for language students to really sort of draw on their sort of natural skills to bring that those experiences and strengths to the fore. So I think we're in a different world now, and I think actually I think it's a great time to be a languages student with all those natural sort of assets that we've been talking about.
And that's just wonderful to hear, because we've all heard the pressure on you have to learn STEM, this is the way to a career, and the valuing of language skills by recruiters. That's very, very encouraging. Wonderful. Okay, so we move to our final set question. One piece of advice for positioning the skills you develop learning languages for corporate roles. And Sophie, could we start with you for this one?
Yeah, of course. So I mean, I wish someone had been able to give me some advice when I was a new graduate, because what Lauren was saying is that the path is so wide open that it's hard to forge your own path forward. But I suppose one thing I would say is don't sell yourself short in terms of the skills you have. Obviously, the language itself is a hard, very tangible skill, but all the surrounding adjacent skills that we've been talking about are just as important. I think what Nigel was mentioning around that very kind of like human aspect of the skills that we have as linguists, especially in the age of AI, ChatGPT, LLMs, is so important, because language is very rarely just about translating language A to B. It's around all the tone, intent, context, everything that goes along with it. And I also think one thing that just came to mind when Nigel was talking is that broader kind of macro picture. We know that language learning is declining at A level, at the higher education level. So the fact that you do have these languages skills, that is a real differentiating factor. So I suppose my piece of advice would be to position your hard skill, that language you have, as a differentiator, as a tool, and absolutely use that to set you apart with all the kind of surrounding soft skills that you have that go along with it.
Brilliant, fantastic. Okay, and Lauren, how about you? What one piece of advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, echoing what Sophie's just said and everything that Nigel was covering off, I think being able to clearly demonstrate really high EQ is going to really set you apart. I think when you're trying to progress through, say, grad scheme applications or kind of early career job kind of interviews where you kind of have less experience, like tangible experience, but kind of EQ is, EQ, critical assessment, those sorts of skills which inherently come when you learn languages are what we absolutely need in order to kind of have a successful future in parallel with these kind of frontier technologies. So certainly kind of trying to clarify that in a very succinct CV, I think would be one thing. But just in sort of a slightly different bit of advice, I worked on my year abroad as opposed to studied, because I felt like it was a fantastic opportunity to do lots of different things in a really safe space. And what that meant was that I graduated having already completed quite prestigious kind of internships or kind of short contracts in different industries. Originally I thought I wanted to go into law, so I went and did a 6-month kind of contract role in a law firm in Spain. I learned that I didn't want to do that, but it meant that I had this kind of 6-month piece of experience on my CV that complemented other things that I had done and, say, holidays, etc. So I think there's, using those opportunities, which for me anyway was a better, I think, learning experience than, because I did a bit of study. I studied in Russia as opposed to work. I think I learned a lot more by being in the workplace, and it was far more, frankly, overwhelming, and kind of, the growth curve was much higher. But as a result, like I say, I graduated with a variety of different bits of experience on my CV, also having perhaps closed off a few of those really, those multiple paths that we've discussed. So if you haven't yet gone on your year abroad and you're thinking about what to do, I personally think trying to find a role or an internship or something in an organisation abroad, for me, I found just incredibly valuable, and really just helped me start to frame where I fitted into these kind of big organisations and institutions and what that might mean for my future. And it gave me an edge, frankly, kind of graduating. I had multiple bits of experience that were really exciting. Gave me something to talk about in interviews, and it gave me just an anchor in those, in those conversations when you're trying to find a foothold and sell yourself, when it feels like, sort of teenage jobs, and just the fact that you graduated doesn't necessarily always feel like, how do you stand apart when you're up against hundreds of graduates with the same.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. And so Nigel, you've obviously spoken about this from the sort of HR perspective, recruiter perspective. As a new graduate or somebody looking to move into the corporate world, how can they position their language skills? What advice could you give?
Well, maybe I'm going to echo Sophie and Lauren together, really. But I mean, I think firstly, be proud of being a linguist. It is sadly a more rare skill than perhaps we'd like it to be. So, but it is a rare skill, and therefore it's an asset. And as we heard about earlier, recruiters value it. So be proud of wearing the language badge, and also be, don't underestimate all of the other kind of then adjacent skills that come with being a language student, as guys have talked about. I think also, maybe echoing slightly a bit what Lauren was saying, I think also look for combinations to offer as well, of skills combinations. So, inevitably, if you're going to be applying to a corporate, whether it's a bank, professional services, or whatever, I mean, obviously, do the basics around showing some interest in that world. I mean, evidencing that, you've kind of done some research on that in that space. And that's why I suppose I go back in my own kind of career and think about those combinations I was talking about. I think I'd I'd done a fairly, I would say, traditional degree in sort of languages, which was quite heavy literature based, which I absolutely loved. But I think it was the masters that I did which brought me into contemporary, Latin American debt crisis, international relations, the role of the US in Latin, all that kind of stuff just gave me a more of a real world currency, I suppose, that I then took into my graduate sort of interviews, and I was able to then combine both the language, the cultural awareness, but with also a sort of, a here and now kind of narrative and a view on the world. And I think those combinations I just feel are quite important.
Fantastic, great. Okay, well, so we've concluded this section, and we'll now move on to the audience poll, the audience questions. And just to start, we've got a very specific question actually for you, Lauren, which was you'd mentioned there was kind of the background of the school you were at, people were studying maths or STEM subjects, and did you feel a sort of pressure to do that? And you mentioned you kind of went on your own path with languages, but yeah, did you feel the pressure?
That's a good question. Yes, I did feel the pressure. I did A-level maths as well with everyone else. So I finished school with A-levels in French, Spanish, and maths. As I say, I think there are different ways to look at learning languages, and I do take a slightly more mathematical approach to some of my, say, friends and colleagues that have always taken a slightly more, I guess, a different approach, I guess, to learning. So yeah, I mean, it's more, I think, my family as well, the big STEM family. My sisters were at Oxbridge doing sciences and things like that. So yes, it was a bit against the grain. But yeah, I mean, so like I say, yes, I did feel the pressure. But actually now I really value that blend. I'm sure we could all debate and discuss this, but I think in this country we narrow down what we learn far too early. When you look at like the baccalaureate and things like that in Europe, it keeps you broad for much longer, which kind of allows you to enrich your skills. So actually, I don't regret having done maths, although I did find my first year at university very challenging, given the inherent focus on literature and history, and I hadn't really written a literature essay for a long time. So that was challenging, and actually probably spurred me going into kind of more of what Nigel was just mentioning there, more of the kind of geopolitical kind of perspectives, and that's what I found much more interesting. My fourth year, I specialised actually in Latin American kind of geopolitics, and particularly looking at kind of the Cuban crisis and how that stemmed and kind of triggered everything across South America. So I don't know, I do love maths, so I it's it's kept me very broad.
Okay, very good. Maybe I could ask similar with you, Sophie, whether you, as you were studying languages, did you at any point think, should I be studying a different subject? Should I be studying the traditional STEM subjects?
Honestly, no. I think I was quite lucky. So I mentioned I grew up in the US, and the US education system, or secondary school education system, is very different in the sense that you have a much broader education system up to age 18. So there wasn't that kind of pressure to really narrowly focus at school. When it came to university and I applied to university, I thought, well, what do I enjoy the most? What do I want to spend the next 3-4 years studying? And I'd always, I'd loved reading. I knew that any degree I did in languages would be literature heavy. I'd loved my time at school studying Spanish, and I knew that I wanted to do a degree that I enjoyed. I think I was probably cognizant of the fact that it might be harder. It wasn't a natural stepping stone to a career like, say, law or medicine or engineering was. But I think at that stage in my life, I was just focused on doing something, like I said, A, that I enjoyed, and B, that I knew that if I enjoyed it, I would probably have a better chance of succeeding in that degree. And that was really my primary focus at that age.
Fantastic. Okay. So next question, I'll try and pick through. We're getting loads of questions coming through, but I'll try and pick some for us in the time we have. So I have spent decades working as a freelance interpreter and translator in media and documentary production. When changing careers, I find employers either expect me to start again at entry level or do not see my freelance experience as relevant for more senior roles. We touched on this a little bit, but what practical steps in this specific case would you recommend for bridging that gap? And perhaps I'll ask Nigel this one.
Yeah, no, I sort of recognize the challenge. I mean, I think I'd go back to that sort of point about sort of skills combinations, you know, and I think unless you're staying in that lane and sort of, you know, wanting to sort of do almost like, you know, that specific kind of job somewhere else, I think it's then about, you know, what broader sort of skills can you either absorb or just reflect on and communicate in a different way. I think sometimes it's not necessarily about going out and getting new experiences. It's about articulating maybe the skills we already have in a broader way, you know. So I think if you've been, you know, in that kind of, you know, specialist field for so long, but I mean, just think about, you know, take a step back and reflect on all the wider skills that you inherently have as a result of that specialism that you've been followed. So I think it's a couple of things. I think it's thinking about skills combinations and what else can you add to your kind of, you know, to your narrative when you're approaching other employers. But it's also, again, maybe I say about reflecting and articulating what skills you already have in a different way.
Fantastic. And we've had a comment on a similar subject, actually. Somebody saying, when I got my first job in an ad agency, so same sort of field, the director who recruited me said, "We love modern linguists because you're such great communicators." So that's nice. We have loads of, I'm trying to balance out because we have loads of questions from students coming in as well. I'll take one here. As a second-year languages student due to commence a year abroad this September in Italy to study and France to work, what other groundwork research ahead of return in final year would you take to prime yourself for entry into a graduate corporate and finance role in companies such as EY or Barclays? Who would like to take this first? Go on, Lauren.
Yeah, I can take that. I can start anyway. So, I mean, great, a nice blend there. So I think you're going to have a fantastic year. I'm very jealous. I would do my year abroad again in a heartbeat if I could. And I did try to emulate that again. When I graduated, I did just travel for a year and a bit, so just before I settled down. I think the best thing that you can start doing is actually start to like map those different pathways that you could be, you know, looking to explore when you graduate. I think partly why I ended up sort of taking a while to settle into something after I graduated was that I hadn't really spent much time doing that, or I experienced a little bit on my year abroad and I thought, yeah, I want to go into journalism or whatever it was, and then actually that didn't really sort of land that well when I did start trying. So I think it's you can't sort of go too early in terms of starting to think about and have conversations with different types of organizations to understand whether it's going to be a good fit for you. I think you need to remember that yours, you know, it's a two-way process, and I think sometimes we forget that in interview process, and when you have to go through these extremely sometimes arduous processes to get onto grad schemes, that it feels like you're constantly having to do the sell, but it is a two-way process. So I think, you know, if you can use the next couple of years to meet with people in different industries, try and understand what their day-to-day looks like, start to see if that feels like a good kind of, you know, interest or a flavor that kind of resonates. And inherently by doing that, you'll also start to build up your network. And you know, you'll start to get exposed to sort of opportunities that might not just sort of land through, say, the student portal, etc. So I think it's, you know, that kind of curiosity that I mentioned earlier in the call, and that kind of go-getter attitude that I just think comes with people that study languages and go and set themselves off on a big adventure globally. You know, embrace that mindset with your career, and know that these days, and I think it's been true for many years now, but like, we're not all set in one career for life in the same way as perhaps were, you know, decades before. And for me, that's a joy. You know, I've done lots of different things, and I'm not that far into my career, and I do plan to do a lot more things. You know, I always say to my colleagues, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and I just enjoy what I do today and the people that I work with. And as long as it's challenging and I'm learning new things and I'm pushing myself, that's exciting. So I think you need to start thinking about what is going to motivate you in a role, and that will inherently lead you to different industries, different organizations, different company cultures. But the earlier you can start doing that kind of mapping and understanding of yourself and what's out there, the better and the easier it will be to kind of start to move into those sorts of opportunities when you look to graduate. Yeah, and don't be afraid to start something and to stop it. You know, if it's not right when you start, that's okay.
Great, thank you.
I think that's fantastic advice. I think squiggly careers, as Sophie described it, I think squiggly careers are the way forward, and you know, not many careers will look like mine anymore, and that's very cool. And I you know, I would perhaps wish I'd had a more of a squiggly career as well. So I think it's really exciting time.
It is, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to group a couple of questions here together, and there's so many questions coming in. By the way, I'm sorry we won't get to them all, but keep them coming. I'll try and group them together. Maybe for you, Sophie, which skills developed through language study do you think are most undervalued by students but most valued by employers? And then a kind of related question, how can language students make themselves more commercially aware so that they can compete when applying for graduate jobs?
So in terms of commercial awareness, I would say it can be quite basic, right? It can be as simple as picking up the newspaper, reading the FT, reading the Economist, and you can even kind of focus if you have a particular region. For me, it was Latin America, and similar to Nigel and Lauren, I did a master's in Latin American politics just to kind of bridge that gap between like pure humanities, pure literature, and bringing it into the very real world. So I'm not saying everyone needs to go out and do further study, but if you want to get that commercial awareness via your particular region, your particular country, certainly you can do it that way and just kind of narrow your focus, and that's something that I definitely did when I was a new graduate. So it can be quite simple or quite accessible, I should say, like that. In terms of undervalued skills, I would say we touched on kind of the EQ, which I think employers are well, they're certainly starting to value more and more. And maybe not undervalued per se, but I would say the simple fact of being able to write well. I can't tell you the number of times I've reviewed a report, an email, and it's just I've had, you know, spelling mistakes or the syntax has been a little bit off. That's not undervalued, but it certainly is. It certainly is really important.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Maybe this one for you, Nigel. Apart from degrees in languages, do recruiters value heritage and community languages in the same way?
Yeah, yes, I would say. I mean, I think that you know, whatever it's the same kind of, it's the same skill sets that you're deploying, isn't it? So so I think I don't think recruiters would make a distinction between those different kinds of languages, and I think that those kind of softer skill sets go with the territory regardless, and it's just a question of articulating them and bringing them out.
Okay. Another one on the study of abroad question, but here a different spin on it. Should I prioritize fluency in one language, e.g. a Romance language, or learning a new one, e.g. Arabic or Mandarin, particularly if I both choose to study and do an internship? So further fluency in one language or adding new languages? Who would like to tackle that one?
I can start. I think either. You know, I think whatever you are particularly maybe like passionate about. I personally, obviously, I mean, I picked up Serbian in my final year actually, and only took it to sort of post A-level standard, because for me, learning new languages was very exciting, and with French and Spanish in particular, I was fairly fluent at that point. Russian I picked up ab initio when I first went to university, so that was a bit different. But I think it really depends what kind of motivates you and drives you, and again, maybe what you're thinking of beyond. You know, fluency is excellent. It's hard to maintain depending on kind of your circumstances. You know, I definitely graduated fluent in French and Spanish. I wouldn't say today I'm as fluent as I was because I don't use them. So it depends really what drives you. And I think back to Sophie's point around kind of like doing something that you love, you know, got a very long career, very long life these days, hopefully, to do all sorts of things and, you know, continue to build skills. So, you know, when you're studying and on something like your year abroad, it's a very unique time where you should just do something that you enjoy and you love and you get sort of value from a personal standpoint, because I'll tell you, there are many years to come where you'll be replying to emails and sitting in meetings and thinking about all sorts of different things. So, use this opportunity to just do what you like, I'd say.
Thank you. Well, we've got so many questions coming in, but I'm afraid we run out of time already. We could have been here, I'm sure, for at least another hour discussing this. So thank you to everyone who's put their questions in, and sorry we haven't been able to cover them all. But yes, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank Nigel, Lauren, and Sophie for their fantastic contributions to this discussion. It's been really very, very interesting. All attendees will receive an attendance certificate and link to the recording within a few working days. If you are a CIOL member, you can log this webinar on MyCPD. So once again, I'd like to thank Nigel, Sophie, and Lauren for these fascinating and interesting contributions. And it's so interesting to hear, how languages can help in roles when it's not just using your language specifically in the role. It's really very helpful and encouraging to hear. I'd also like to thank Sahela at CIOL, who's been working away in the background to ensure this event runs smoothly for us all. One more thanks for Nigel as well for helping us bring the panel and bring Lauren and Sophie here to complete the panel. And thank you all for listening and participating in the webinar. I hope it's given you food for thought, whether you're early in your career, wondering how your skills as a linguist can open doors in the corporate world, or whether you're already an established professional looking to enter the corporate world. Thank you all very much, and goodbye.